the Midwest. The part of America that's easily written off as boring. I grew up there, so I think it's pretty interesting. It's got a lot of history to it. And today, I'm going to dig into the history of the city of Fairfield, Ohio. Little disclaimer, Fairfield wasn't a city until 1955, but I'm going to go through all the history that I could find, that I could deduce, and that I knew about this chunk of land just north of Cincinnati. So obviously, for thousands of years, Native Americans lived in Fairfield. It wasn't Fairfield, but you know what I mean. Today, however, there's not really a lot of evidence of that. It's hard to find. If you'd ask anybody from Fairfield, name one Native American tribe that lived here, you'd be hard-pressed to find an answer. In fact, if you are from Fairfield, go on and comment now. I'm going to ramble until you do. I know that you're waiting to do it. Okay. Did you tell me a tribe that lived in Fairfield? Okay, good. You got it? Great. There were two right answers that you could have said. There were the Miami and the Shawnee. The Shawnee mostly lived in the Ohio Valley region, and the Miami lived along the Miami rivers. You could have also kind of said Hopewell. Hopewell wasn't necessarily the name of a tribe. It's more of a cultural pattern that Native Americans had all over the eastern United States, and there were Hopewell tribes in southwestern Ohio. So a lot of the things that were left from them after Europeans moved in, and we had wars with them, and then we had our agriculture there, and then we shipped them away on the Trail of Tears. Well, that was a little bit more in the south, but it also happened in Ohio. After all that, most of what was left were Indian mounds, and to my knowledge, there are no Indian mounds in Fairfield, Ohio. I know of one in Joyce Park in Hamilton, Ohio, but if there were any in Fairfield, they were leveled for agriculture. So, unless you find an arrowhead, there's basically no evidence of Native Americans living there. Now, in the early 1800s, as the new nation of the United States was beginning to really expand into its new frontier of what is today Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan, the Northwest Purchase, or the Northwest Territory, I should have called it, there was all sorts of different land claims being made as that expansion was happening. Here's a map of Ohio from essentially just before it became a state. You've got Connecticut up near Cleveland. You've got the Virginia Army, Virginia Military, what's that called? Survey. If I said that right, you'll see the words right here if I didn't. And then down here in this purple splotch, which I'm going to gesture to like a weatherman, but it was probably nowhere close, is called the Sims Purchase. So there was a guy in New Jersey. He was a judge. His name was John Cleves Sims. Judge Sims had a friend who had his horse stolen by Native Americans in Kentucky and then ended up chasing them north all the way to where Xenia is today, which means he went through all of what would become Cincinnati and Fairfield and Hamilton and Lebanon and all that stuff, right? And he told Judge Sims, I think you should buy some of that land because it's very fertile and there's nothing there except for Native Americans. So, Judge Sims started collecting some money, gathering a company to go settle it, and he intended to purchase all the way up to the line at the top there, but he really could only afford the bottom third, which is everything in between the Ohio River, the Great and Little Miami rivers, and up to a line that's in modern-day Lebanon. So that includes a lot of land, and he bought it all for 66 2/3 cents an acre. Kings Island, east side of Hamilton, a lot of Cincinnati, not all of Cincinnati, because the rivers kind of meet in Cincinnati, most of downtown Cincinnati, and of course Fairfield, all that land. Now, let's do some fun math. How much did he pay for the city of Fairfield? Okay, so some quick Googling showed me that the city of Fairfield is about 20 square miles. It's about 13,000 acres, which means all in all, he bought the city of Fairfield for almost $9,000. I'm going to say the correct amount, the calculated amount right here, because I don't remember everything I wrote down. That's not a lot of money. Let's move that over into 2021 dollars. It turns out to be $273,000 that he paid for the entirety of the city of Fairfield. There are houses in Fairfield that are worth more than that now. That's a steal. I mean, sure, it wasn't developed. There was nothing there. But that's a lot of land. So after he bought that land, he started settling it. And for the first 150 years, Fairfield was mostly an agricultural community. There were 4 or 5 little hamlets that sprung up before it really started to take off and become a city. The 2 oldest of which are called Fairplay, which was the home of the first paper mill in Ohio. It is, or was, on the east bank of the Miami River, near where the One-Way Farm Waterworks Park area is today. And then there was another one called Sims Corner, which was established by Judge Sims's great-nephew, Celadon Sims. Now you know where that road gets its name. And it was at the corner of what is today Pleasant and Nilles, kind of right next to the municipal building, the heart of Fairfield. That Chase Bank is right there. That was part of the Underground Railroad. That's cool. I don't think that was built by Sims. Yeah, it's got his name on the... Oh my god, I just remembered that. Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry. Anyway. About 50 years after that, the Cincinnati Hamilton Dayton Railroad was built, and it led to 3 little villages, hamlets, communities popping up around where the tracks were. One was called Schneck's Station, which was at the corner of Route 4 and Sims. Right where that sign is, it says, "Thank you for visiting Fairfield." There's the railroad tracks. That's where it was. The next one was Stockton. That was at the corner of Seward and Route 4, where those train tracks are, behind the Frisch's and the JJ's Hair Salon. That was a little, because those train tracks were there, that was a little stopping point where people could buy and sell things, I guess. That's how it was talked about in there, that it was like a commerce strengthener. And then in between those two was a place called Fermandale. Fermandale was at the corner of Winton and Nilles, next to the middle school. And there was some kind of school for girls there, some guy with the last name Furman. I'll take this out if it's not. I think I'm remembering that correctly. Now, I'm naming these roads so that you know, because that's what the Wikipedia says it was near. Obviously, those roads didn't exist. I don't think they had those names back then. But they did exist as cattle paths. So, modern-day Pleasant Avenue, modern-day Route 4, that was the way that farmers would take their cattle, move it around to, I don't know, sell it at the next city. And those worn paths are what eventually became the main roads of the city of Fairfield. That was the 1850s, and for the next 100 years or so, not a ton changed. Obviously, a lot was changing in history, right? I just skipped over the Civil War, World War I, World War II, but during that time, Fairfield was mostly just an agricultural city, agricultural area. It wasn't one big place. It was called Fairfield Township. In 1929, the school, if you ever went to Central, kids my age went to Central. It was only torn down, when was that, 2017? That was built in 1929, and that was one of the oldest schools in Ohio. when it was torn down. So I mean, it was expanding, and there were people there, but it wasn't like a major place. It wasn't like a city. Then, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, the Fisher Body Plant was built in Schneck Station, and this was like Hamilton was expanding down, and that industry started really growing, and that led to Fairfield's population also being able to grow. Then in the 60s, or the late 50s, I should say, the 275 loop was built around Cincinnati, and that hit Route 4 like really close to Fairfield, and 127, which just made it getting around that area a lot easier. So during this time of building bigger infrastructure and growing job opportunities, Fairfield explodes. In 1960, there were about 9,000 people living in Fairfield, and then by 1980, that number had over tripled to over 30,000 people. By 1990, it had grown by another 10,000 people to about 40,000. But in 89, the Fisher Body Plant was closed down, which that was the whole economy of the city of Fairfield, essentially. Since then, the population of Fairfield has only grown a little bit. It's up to about 43,000 now. However, the economy has simply diversified. There's all those industries that are on Sims towards Fairfield Township. Those are pretty major employers. There's Jungle Gyms. Jungle Gyms is huge. And I'll get more to that later. And then there's Cincinnati Financial is the number one employer in the city of Fairfield. So now that we've gone through the whole history of Fairfield, let's talk about some of the people who came from Fairfield. Now, if you look at the Wikipedia page, what you'll find is that most of those people are from Hamilton, that's fine, that's right next to Fairfield. They might have even lived in Fairfield for some time. But what I'm interested in is people who were born in the city of Fairfield, graduated from Fairfield, maybe, that they were from that area. This is a very acute thing I'm trying to talk about. So, obviously, Joe Nuxall, the youngest person to ever play in the Major League Baseball, in 1944, because all the grown men were off to war, they brought a 15-year-old from Hamilton to pitch. And it was, it sounds really cool, but then you look into it, it was the, end of the game, they were already losing, and he led up, 5 runs. I'm going to correct myself if I'm wrong. Then there's, I could find 2 people that were legitimate Fairfieldians that are on Wikipedia. One of them is Eric Lang. He played Sikowitz in Victorious. He was also on Lost. But he graduated from Fairfield High School just 3 years after my mother. 3 years after my mother. So that's really cool. But the second person I could find was legitimately, obscure, hadn't heard of him before, and it did something really cool that I am mad that I was never told about. Harvey Washington Walter was born in the year 1819 in Fairfield, Ohio. At that time, it wasn't Fairfield, Ohio, as I mentioned before. He ended up moving to Mississippi in a place called Holly Springs, and became a lawyer and the president of the Mississippi Central Railroad. Now, Civil War hits, and this is a fairly important person in that area, and he's anti-secession. He was the lawyer to a Confederate general, but even still, he was against the Civil War. Now, this is something that I'm not entirely sure of. The town of Holly Springs, Mississippi, became a depot for the Union. Now, I don't know if that was because this guy talked to Grant and said, "You can live in my mansion," or if Grant chose that city and he said, "Hey, while you're here, you can stay in my mansion." Either way, he lodged the Grants and their belongings in his mansion in Mississippi during the Civil War, which means future First Lady Julia Grant stayed there and was kept safe there. There was a raid on Holly Springs from Confederate General Earl Van Dorn, and when he comes to the mansion, Harvey says, "You can't come in." Now, one version of the story is, "You can't come in until Mrs. Grant has left." And then Mrs. Grant's version of the story was just, he didn't let him in, but they still destroyed my carriage and killed my horses. The point of the raid was just to destroy things that belonged to the Union, to keep them from being able to operate their depot there. And hitting that mansion was just another thing that they did. Point is, that's a hardcore thing to do. When the Confederate general is knocking on your front door and says, "Let me in, I want to destroy stuff," and you say, "No." Like, what a baller. What a king. That's really cool. This guy put it all on the line. He could have easily been killed in that, but they spared him. He offers his mansion again later in life. In 1878, there's a yellow fever outbreak in Holly Springs, and he opens up his mansion as a hospital for the sick. Unfortunately, this time, he dies because of his philanthropy. All of his family dies to yellow fever in that year, including all of his sons. But that's cool. That's crazy. I can't believe I've never heard of this person. I mean, I can believe it, but that's so cool. And he's from Fairfield. Now, there were a few other people, mostly Hamiltonians, that I thought were pretty cool that I thought about talking about here. There's a guy named Brad Warner. He's a Zen priest and heavy metal rocker. There's Charles Richter, the inventor of the Richter scale, was born just north of Hamilton. There's John Cleve Sims Jr., so that's the judge's son. He had a hollow earth theory that the way to get into the hollow earth was at the poles. And he went to Congress to try to raise money to go to the North Pole to go inside the earth. He didn't get to go there, but there is a statue in Hamilton of his hollow earth. There's Ray Combs, the second host of Family Feud, comedian. Tragically, when he was 40, all in one year, Family Feud stopped. His comedy clubs failed, and his wife left him, so he killed himself. Tragic life. Look at any of those people's Wikipedia pages. They're really cool. Finally, if you ever find yourself in Fairfield, Ohio, here are 3 things that I suggest that you do. 1, go to Jungle Gyms. Easy. It's an amusement. Like, I don't want to call it an amusement park, but it's an amusement park. There's, all sorts of crazy stuff there. Jungle Jim himself is not from Fairfield. He's from, Cleveland. But I worked there, so I know a little bit more about the history of the place. It's the craziest place that you could ever... It's a landmark. Go to Jungle Jim's International Market if you live anywhere around there. I'm sure you have already. Obviously. Everyone's been to Jungle Gyms. What am I saying? 2, go to Harbin Park. Go up on the top hill. Just turn onto Hunter and just keep driving until you reach the end of the flagpole and look out over the city of Hamilton. It's beautiful. Gorgeous. I love that place. And 3, eat at House of Bangkok Thai cuisine. It's delicious. I've lived in Tampa for coming up on 3 years. 2.5 years. I haven't found better Thai food in Tampa. And Tampa is not only a larger city than the Cincinnati area, it's got more international people than the Cincinnati by a long shot. And there's no good Thai food here. Go to House of Bangkok. Nothing compares. I love it. Thank you all very much for watching. Have yourselves a great day.